Forget the Christmas cards. Forget the peaceful wooden stable you've seen 1,000 times. The real story of Jesus isn't a fairy tale. It's a gritty survival story buried under layers of history. It's 5 BC. Today, we're not tracing a myth. We're following forensic evidence across a map of the ancient world. From the geology of the ground to the brutal politics of Rome, this is the unfiltered reality of the man who split time in two. A teenage girl, 9 months pregnant, is walking 90 miles into the unknown, and history is about to break. Mary shouldn't have made this journey. It was far too dangerous in her condition. But the order came from the highest power on the known earth, Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus, a mandatory census. It wasn't just a head count, it was a display of ownership. Rome wanted to know exactly who they owned and exactly how much they could tax them. And Joseph, being a descendant of King David, has no choice. He has to register in his ancestral city, Bethlehem. So they set out. A teenage girl, 9 months pregnant, and a carpenter, walking from Nazareth to Bethlehem. That is a distance of 90 miles. To put that in perspective, imagine walking from New York to Philadelphia or London to Southampton, but without paved roads, hiking boots, or safety. They are crossing the rugged hill country of Samaria and Judea. The elevation rises and falls dramatically. The days are scorching and the nights can drop to freezing. This isn't the peaceful procession you see in pageants. This is a battle for survival. Banditry is common on these roads. Wild animals are a constant threat. And with every step, Mary feels the weight of the child pressing down. Her feet are swollen, her body is exhausted, yet she walks for nearly a week. And so, the prophecy moves toward fulfillment. When they finally arrive in the small village of Bethlehem, they are shattered. And that is when the contractions begin. Mary is in labor. Joseph scrambles, knocking on door after door, desperate for a place for his wife to rest. But there is no room. The town is overflowing with other travelers there for the census. Night closes in on them. And this is where we need to stop and rewrite the image in your mind. You probably picture a wooden stable with a thatched roof, surrounded by snow, like on a Christmas card. But no, that is a Western invention from the Middle Ages. The reality of Judea tells a completely different story. You might be asking yourself, why not a wooden stable? The answer lies in the geology. Bethlehem sits on a ridge of porous limestone. For thousands of years, the people of this region didn't build on top of the ground. They built into it. They utilized the natural caves that riddle the landscape. In the 1st century, a typical home in Bethlehem was built directly in front of or above a cave. The family lived in the upper structure or the front room. The cave at the back or underneath was used to keep the livestock warm and safe during the cold nights. This lower area was dark, damp, and smelled of animals. This is where Mary and Joseph found shelter. Archaeology confirms this. If you visit the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem today, one of the oldest churches in the world, you don't walk into a wooden barn. You descend a set of worn stone steps into a grotto, a cave, and there is another detail that changes everything. The Bible says Jesus was laid in a manger. We often think of a wooden basket filled with hay, but the Greek word used here refers to a feeding trough. In these limestone caves, mangers weren't built of wood. They were carved directly into the rock walls, cold, hard stone niches. Think about that image. Jesus wasn't born in a romanticized architectural structure. He was born into the cold, rough earth. He was born in the dark, surrounded by the smell of manure and damp stone. The King of Kings didn't just come to earth. He came to the very bottom of it. He entered the world in the most absolute humility imaginable, placed in a stone trough carved into the side of a cave. This geological reality matters. It means that from his very first breath, Jesus was already touching the deepest, darkest, and hardest parts of human existence. He wasn't hidden away in a palace. He was grounded in the dirt and rock of a broken world. And the first people to find him there wouldn't be kings or priests, but the only ones who felt at home in the dirt, the shepherds. While the family huddles in the cold of the cave, a shadow looms over Jerusalem, just 6 miles away. To understand the danger Jesus is in, you have to understand the man sitting on the throne, Herod the Great. History calls him great because he was a master builder. He built the massive temple complex, fortresses, and port cities. But by the time Jesus is born, Herod is a monster. He is 70 years old, paranoid, and physically rotting from the inside out. Ancient historians describe his condition in gruesome detail. He suffers from an agonizing, foul-smelling disease, likely gangrene of the genitals. He is in constant screaming pain. The stench of his decaying flesh is so unbearable that his servants struggle to get near him. And this physical rot mirrors the rot in his soul. This is a man who saw threats in every shadow. He had already executed his favorite wife, Mariamne, in a fit of jealousy. He murdered 3 of his own sons because he feared they were plotting against him. Caesar Augustus reportedly joked that it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son. Into this atmosphere of terror walk a group of travelers from the east. We call them the wise men, or the 3 kings, but they aren't monarchs. They are magi, astronomer priests from Persia. They study the stars, looking for shifts in the cosmos that predict the rise and fall of empires. They have seen a sign, likely a rare conjunction of Jupiter, the king planet, and Saturn, the protector of Israel. And they have traveled hundreds of miles to ask one simple, deadly question. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? Imagine the silence in the throne room. Herod isn't the born king. He was appointed by Rome. He has no royal blood. He is an Edomite usurper. And now strangers are asking about a legitimate heir. Herod's paranoia explodes. He summons the chief priests and scribes. He asks them where the Messiah is supposed to be born. They know the theology perfectly. In Bethlehem of Judea, they answer, quoting the prophet Micah. Here is the tragedy of religion without relationship. The religious leaders know the exact location. It's only a 2-hour walk away. But not one of them bothers to go and check. They have the map, but they miss the destination. Herod sends the Magi to Bethlehem with a lie. Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. The Magi find the child, no longer a newborn, but likely a toddler by now, living in a house with Mary and Joseph. They fall down and worship him. They present their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they slip away to their own country by another route. Back in Jerusalem, Herod waits. When he realizes he has been outwitted, his rage is absolute. He cannot identify the specific child, so he decides to cast a net so wide that the rival king cannot possibly escape. He orders the slaughter of all boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who are 2 years old and under. Soldiers march on the sleepy village. The sound of weeping mothers rises from the hills of Judea, fulfilling the prophecy of Jeremiah. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. But the target of this massacre is already gone. An angel appears to Joseph in a dream with an urgent command. Get up, take the child and his mother, and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Joseph doesn't hesitate. In the middle of the night, they pack what little they have and flee. This is not a short trip. The journey to the border of Egypt is at least 40 miles, but to reach a safe Jewish community like Alexandria, they have to travel hundreds of miles across harsh desert terrain. They are refugees fleeing a genocidal dictator. And here is where the Magi's visit makes practical sense. Have you ever wondered how a poor carpenter could afford to travel to a foreign country and live there as a refugee for months or years? God provided the funding before the crisis even started. The gold from the Magi wasn't just a shiny trinket. It was the financial lifeline that paid for their food, shelter, and safety in Egypt. While the Holy Family hides in the safety of the Nile, Herod meets his end. His death is as horrific as his life. The Jewish historian Josephus records that he died in excruciating torment, consumed by worms and convulsions, a fitting end for a man who tried to kill the author of life. Only when the monster is dead does the angel speak to Joseph again. Go back to the land of Israel, for those who wanted to kill the child are dead. The family returns, but they don't go back to Judea. Herod's son, Archelaus, is now ruling there, and he is just as brutal as his father. So God redirects them north to a quiet, obscure region called Galilee. to a town named Nazareth. The stage is set. The years of silence are about to begin. The family settles in Nazareth. It is a tiny, dusty village nestled in the hills of Galilee. Archaeologists tell us that in the first century, barely 300 people lived here. It is so small, so insignificant, that it doesn't even appear once in the Old Testament. It is a place where you go to be forgotten. Jesus grows up here. And this is where we need to stop. We need to hit pause on the story and rewrite the image you have in your head. Because if you close your eyes and picture Jesus walking these streets, what do you see? If you are picturing the Jesus from Renaissance paintings or Hollywood movies, tall with pale white skin, blue eyes, and long, flowing light brown hair, like a shampoo commercial, you are looking at a European invention, not a historical reality. We need to look at the forensics. We need to look at the biological truth. Jesus was a first-century Jew living in the Middle East. Based on skeletal remains found in the region, from that era and modern forensic anthropology, we can reconstruct his true appearance. And it is likely shocking to many Western believers. He had olive skin, darkened by the Galilean sun. His eyes were dark brown, and his hair, it wasn't long and straight. The Apostle Paul, writing later, even mentions that long hair on a man was considered a disgrace in that culture. Jesus likely had short, dark, curly hair and a thick beard, following the customs of Jewish men of his time. And he wasn't physically frail. He didn't have the soft hands of a scholar. The Greek word the Bible uses for Joseph's profession is tekton. We translate it as carpenter. But in a rocky landscape like Nazareth, a tekton was more of a stonemason or a builder. Jesus spent 18 years hauling heavy rocks, felling trees, and building structures under the blistering heat. He had the calloused hands, the broad shoulders, and the muscular build of a manual laborer. He looked tough. He looked ordinary. Why does this matter? Why destroy the pretty picture? Because this physical reality fulfills a specific prophecy written by Isaiah 700 years earlier. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. God didn't choose to enter the world as a supermodel. He didn't come as a glowing figure that demanded attention. He chose a face that would blend into a crowd. He looked so average, so utterly human, that years later in the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas Iscariot would have to kiss him just so the Roman soldiers could tell him apart from his disciples. He didn't conquer the world with his appearance. He conquered it with the truth burning inside him. But don't make the mistake of thinking Jesus grew up isolated from the world in this tiny village. Nazareth held a secret. Just 4 miles away, about an hour's walk, was the city of Sepphoris. It was the capital of Galilee, a bustling, cosmopolitan city that Herod Antipas was rebuilding. It is very likely that Jesus and Joseph walked there to work on construction projects. And just below the village ran the Via Maris, the Way of the Sea. This was the superhighway of the ancient world, connecting the empires of Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. Roman legions marched here. Merchants with exotic spices and silks passed by here. From the hills of Nazareth, the young Jesus could look down and see the world passing by. He saw the wealth, the power, the cruelty of the soldiers, and the hopelessness of the slaves. He grew up watching the very world he came to save. For 30 years, the Bible is almost completely silent about his life. We have only one glimpse behind the curtain. When Jesus turns 12, he becomes a son of the commandment, what we call a bar mitzvah today. He travels with his parents to Jerusalem for the Passover. It is a trek of over 60 miles, but on the way back, chaos strikes. Mary and Joseph lose him. They are traveling in a large caravan, and for a whole day, they assume he is playing with his cousins. When they realize he is gone, panic sets in. They search desperately for 3 days. Finally, they find him. He isn't lost. He is in the temple courts. He is sitting among the teachers of the law, the PhDs of ancient Israel. And he isn't just listening, he is asking questions. His understanding is so profound that these old scholars are astonished. When his frantic parents finally drag him away, he asks them a question that chills the air. Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? It is the first time in recorded history that anyone refers to God as Father in such a personal, intimate way. It is a scandal. It is a glimpse of the divine nature hiding beneath the skin of the carpenter's son. But then the curtain falls again. Jesus goes back to Nazareth. He submits to his parents. He picks up his tools. For another 18 years, the creator of the universe lives a quiet, ordinary life. 18 years of sawdust. 18 years of anonymity. We often want the spotlight. We want the breakthrough now. But Jesus shows us the power of waiting. He prepares in the shadows for 3 decades to minister for just 3 years. He waits until the time is right. He waits until a wild prophet appears in the desert, wearing camel's hair and eating locusts. The clock is ticking. The map is about to expand. The carpenter is about to put down his tools and pick up his cross. Jesus puts down his chisel. He wipes the sawdust from his hands for the last time. He says goodbye to his mother, Mary, and walks out of Nazareth. He leaves the only life he has ever known to walk toward a destiny that has been waiting since the foundation of the world. He heads south, descending into the Jordan Valley. And here is where geography tells a story that theology often misses. Did you know that the story of Jesus' ministry begins literally at the lowest place on earth? The Jordan River flows through a rift valley that sits about 430 meters below sea level. It is the single lowest point of dry land on the planet. Think about the symbolism of that. The Most High God didn't start his mission on a mountain peak or in a high tower. He went down. He descended to the absolute bottom, to the geological depths of the world, to identify with us in our lowest moments. There, standing waist-deep in the muddy water, is his cousin, John, a wild man eating locusts, shouting for repentance. John recognizes him instantly. He tries to stop him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you." But Jesus insists. He is stepping into his role. And as he rises from the water, the dimension between heaven and earth tears open. The Spirit descends. The Father speaks. "This is my beloved Son." It is a moment of pure glory. But the map doesn't lead to a palace. It leads to a wasteland. Immediately, the Spirit drives Jesus into the Judean wilderness. This isn't a camping trip. This is a hostile, barren landscape of jagged rocks and suffocating heat. And he is there for 40 days and 40 nights without food. We often glaze over this. We think of it as a spiritual retreat. But physically, his body's breaking down. Medical experts tell us that after 40 days of fasting, the body begins to consume its own muscle tissue for energy. He is emaciated. He is hallucinating from dehydration. He is on the brink of death. And that is exactly when the enemy strikes. Satan doesn't attack when we are strong. He attacks when we are weak. He attacks Jesus with 3 temptations: power, preservation, and pride. But even in his weakest physical state, Jesus stands firm. He doesn't use divine superpowers to blast Satan away. He uses the same weapon available to you and me, the Word of God. He defeats the enemy, and he walks out of the desert ready to begin. Filled with the power of the Spirit, Jesus returns home. He goes back to Nazareth. Imagine the scene. The local boy has returned. Rumors of his baptism and his time in the desert have likely preceded him. On the Sabbath, he enters the synagogue, the same place he went every week growing up. He stands up to read. He is handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He unrolls it to a specific spot and reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to set the oppressed free." He rolls up the scroll, hands it back to the attendant, and sits down. Every eye in the room is fastened on him. The silence is heavy. Then he drops the bomb. "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." He is claiming to be the Messiah. At first, the people are amazed. They whisper, "Wow, look at how he speaks." But then human nature kicks in, the tall poppy syndrome. Someone in the back whispers, "Wait a minute, isn't this Joseph's son? Isn't this the guy who fixed my table last week? Isn't this the carpenter?" Wonder turns to skepticism. Skepticism turns to offense. An offense fueled by familiarity turns into a murderous rage. They don't see the Messiah. They only see the laborer they grew up with. They cannot accept that God would use someone so ordinary, someone from their own backyard. The meeting dissolves into a riot. The people, his neighbors, the men who watched him grow up, seize him. They drag him out of the synagogue and hustle him to the edge of the hill on which the town is built. They intend to throw him off the cliff. They want to kill him. This is his homecoming: rejection, betrayal, violence. But then, something sovereign happens. The Bible says simply, he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. He didn't fight them. He didn't argue. He simply carried a presence so commanded that they couldn't touch him. He walked away. Jesus left Nazareth that day, and as far as we know, he never lived there again. He moved his base of operations to Capernaum, a fishing village by the Sea of Galilee. He left the place of his past to embrace the place of his purpose. The carpenter was gone. The Savior had arrived. Jesus establishes his new headquarters in Capernaum. This is a strategic masterstroke. Capernaum isn't a backwater. It is a bustling border town on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It sits directly on the trade route connecting Damascus to the Mediterranean. By positioning himself here, Jesus ensures his message will flow out to the nations like blood through a main artery. And it begins with a whisper, not a shout. He travels to a wedding in Cana, a small village nearby. In the first century, a wedding isn't just a party. It is a social contract, a community event that lasts for days. To run out of wine is a social catastrophe. It brings shame upon the family that can last a generation. When the wine runs dry, Mary turns to Jesus. He points to 6 stone water jars. These aren't small pitchers. Each one holds 20 to 30 gallons. He orders the servants to fill them with water. In an instant, the molecular structure changes. He doesn't just make wine. He creates over 150 gallons of the finest vintage imaginable. He saves a family from shame without taking any credit. But the secrecy doesn't last. The miracles begin to escalate, and with them, the danger. In Capernaum, the house where he stays is besieged. The text says the crowds are so thick that no one can get through the door. A paralyzed man is lowered through the roof. Jesus heals him, but he does something even more provocative. He forgives the man's sins. The religious scribes in the corner bristle. Who can forgive sins but God alone? They are right. In their eyes, this carpenter is claiming divine authority. Then comes the moment that makes the crowd gasp in horror. A man full of leprosy approaches. Leprosy in the ancient world is a living death sentence. You are an outcast, forced to shout, "Unclean," to warn people away. To touch a leper is to become ritually unclean yourself. But Jesus reaches out his hand. He touches the rotting skin. Physics says the infection should pass to Jesus. Instead, purity flows from Jesus to the man. The leprosy vanishes. This is a direct challenge to the Levitical system. Jesus is saying, I am the source of purity. I don't need the temple rituals to make this man clean. The fame explodes. It becomes unmanageable. He crosses the Sea of Galilee to a desolate place, trying to find rest. But a massive crowd, 5,000 men, plus women and children, follows him on foot around the lake. They are hungry. With just 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 small fish, Jesus feeds a multitude that could fill a stadium. The physics of this miracle are shattering. Bread multiplying in hands, fish regenerating. But look at the crowd's reaction. They don't fall to their knees in repentance. They try to seize him by force to make him king. They want a revolutionary who can provide free food and drive out the Romans. Jesus refuses. He sends his disciples into a boat and dismisses the crowd. He climbs a mountain to pray alone. That night, a storm hits the lake. The disciples are fighting for their lives against waves that can reach 10 feet high on the Sea of Galilee. And then, at the 4th watch of the night, between 3 and 6 a.m., they see him. Jesus is walking on the fluid surface of the water. He isn't swimming, he is trampling the waves. He intends to pass by them, a gesture that echoes the Old Testament God who treads on the waves of the sea. Peter steps out in faith, defying gravity for a moment, before fear pulls him down. Jesus rescues him, and the moment they step into the boat, the wind dies. The disciples are terrified. They ask the question that hangs over the entire story. Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. But in Jerusalem, the question isn't, who is this? It is, how do we kill him? Jesus travels south to Jerusalem for a festival. He walks into the pool of Bethesda, a site crowded with the sick and disabled. He heals a man who has been invalid for 38 years, but he does it on the Sabbath. For the Pharisees, this is a declaration of war. You do not work on the Sabbath. When they confront him, Jesus doesn't apologize. He doubles down. My Father is working until now, and I am working. The shock is immediate. He isn't just breaking the Sabbath. He is calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. The religious leaders realize he is not just a reformer. He is an existential threat to their power structure. If he can forgive sins, heal diseases, and rewrite the laws of the Sabbath, then the temple system is obsolete. And if the temple is obsolete, their power is gone. The tension builds until it snaps at the Feast of Tabernacles. Jesus stands in the temple courts, surrounded by hostile leaders. The debate becomes heated. They question his origin. They question his testimony. They call him a Samaritan and demon-possessed. They ask, "Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died. Who do you think you are?" Jesus looks at them. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. He drops the ultimate bombshell. Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Ego eimi. The crowd freezes. He didn't just say he is old. He used the divine name. I am is the name God gave to Moses at the burning bush. It is the name so sacred that Jews would not even pronounce it. By applying it to himself, Jesus is claiming to be the eternal, self-existent God of Israel. For the religious leaders, this is the end of the debate. It is blasphemy of the highest order. They don't wait for a trial. They don't call the guards. They stoop down and pick up stones from the temple construction site. They intend to crush his skull right there in the courtyard. This is the tipping point. There is no going back. The miracles were one thing. Claiming to be God is another. Jesus slips away from the mob and exits the temple grounds. But the die is cast. His death warrant is effectively signed. The only question now is when. The clock is ticking. The shadow of the cross begins to lengthen over the map. And Jesus sets his face toward his final destination. Jesus retreats across the Jordan to Perea, seeking a moment of safety. But the quiet doesn't last. A messenger arrives with urgent news from Bethany. His close friend Lazarus is dying. You would expect Jesus to run. You would expect him to rush back to save the man he loves. But he doesn't. He stays where he is for 2 more days. To the disciples, this looks like negligence. To Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, it feels like abandonment. But Jesus is waiting for a specific reason. He isn't waiting for Lazarus to get better. He is waiting for Lazarus to be dead. When Jesus finally arrives in Bethany, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. Here is a detail you need to know to understand the gravity of this moment. In ancient Jewish tradition, there was a belief that the soul of a deceased person hovered near the body for 3 days, hoping to re-enter. But by the 4th day, when the body began to decompose and the face became unrecognizable, hope was gone. The spirit had departed. The death was irreversible. Jesus didn't wait by accident. He waited to ensure there was no doubt. He wasn't walking into a sick room. He was walking into a funeral. He stands before the tomb. He orders the stone to be rolled away. Martha protests, "Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." She is practical. She knows the smell of death, but the stone is moved. Jesus looks into the darkness and shouts with a command that shatters the silence of the grave. "Lazarus, come out!" And then, the impossible happens. A figure appears in the doorway, wrapped head to toe in grave clothes, shuffling into the sunlight. Lazarus is alive. This is the greatest public miracle Jesus has ever performed. It happens just 2 miles from Jerusalem. The news explodes. Witnesses run to the city. The people are ecstatic. But in the high halls of power, the reaction is not joy. It is terror. This is the twist. This is the moment the timeline accelerates toward death. The miracle of Lazarus doesn't convert the religious leaders. It cements their resolve to kill him. The Sanhedrin, the supreme council of the Jewish people, calls an emergency meeting. Listen to their logic. It isn't just religious jealousy anymore. It is political survival. They ask, what are we accomplishing? Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. This is the key. They are terrified of Rome. They know that if the people declare Jesus king, the Roman legions will march on Jerusalem, and burn it to the ground. They see Jesus as a political liability. Then Caiaphas, the high priest, stands up and delivers the verdict that seals Jesus' fate. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. It is a chilling utilitarian calculation. Sacrifice the innocent to save the system. From that day on, the warrant is out. Jesus is a dead man walking. But Jesus doesn't hide. He does the exact opposite. It is Passover season. Jerusalem is swelling with pilgrims. Historians estimate the population could jump from 50,000 to over 200,000 during the festival. The city is a powder keg waiting for a spark, and Jesus lights the match. He heads straight for the city. But he doesn't walk in on foot like a pilgrim, and he doesn't ride a war horse like a conqueror. He sends for a donkey. This is a deliberate visual message. He is enacting the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey. As he descends the Mount of Olives, the view of the temple is breathtaking. The crowd spots him. The word spreads. The man who raised Lazarus is here. Hysteria takes over. They cut down palm branches, a national symbol of Jewish independence. They lay their cloaks on the road, creating a royal carpet. They shout, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna means save us. But here is the tragedy. They are shouting for the wrong salvation. They want a king who will drive out the Romans. They want a lion. But Jesus is riding in as a lamb. The air is electric, but it is heavy with doom. The religious leaders tell him to silence his disciples. Jesus replies, I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. He enters Jerusalem. He goes straight to the temple, and for the second time he clears it. He overturns the tables of the money changers. He shuts down the commercial traffic. He declares war on the corruption of God's house. For the next few days, the tension in Jerusalem is unbearable. It is a staring contest between the Son of God and the powers of darkness. Every word he speaks is a challenge. Every step he takes is watched. The trap is set. The pieces are moving into place. The crowd loves him today, but the leaders are plotting in the shadows, and they need an insider. They need someone close to him to break the circle. The turning point has passed. The road to the cross is now the only road left. On Thursday night, the timeline narrows. The map zooms in on a single room in the upper city of Jerusalem. Jesus gathers his 12 disciples for the Passover meal. The atmosphere in the room is heavy. Outside, the city is buzzing with the festival, but inside, Jesus is somber. He knows the clock has run out. He stands up, takes off his outer clothing, and wraps a towel around his waist. Then he does the unthinkable. He pours water into a basin and begins to wash his disciples' feet. In the first century, this is the job of the lowest slave in the household. It is social suicide for a rabbi to do this. But Jesus is redefining power. He is showing them that in his kingdom, the leader is the one who serves. He washes the feet of Peter, who will deny him. He washes the feet of Judas, who is about to sell him. Then they sit at the table. Jesus takes a piece of bread, dips it in the dish, and hands it to Judas Iscariot. What you are about to do quickly, he whispers. Judas takes the bread and disappears into the night. Have you ever thought about the price of the betrayal? 30 pieces of silver. According to the book of Exodus, this was the exact price of a slave. Judas didn't just sell his friend, he sold the creator of the universe for the price of a damaged piece of property. Jesus is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. The disciples flee in terror. He is dragged through a series of illegal trials in the middle of the night, first to Annas, then to Caiaphas, then to the Sanhedrin. By morning, he is bruised, beaten, and exhausted. But the Jewish leaders have a problem. They can pronounce a death sentence, but under Roman occupation, they cannot carry it out. Only Rome can execute. So as the sun rises, they drag Jesus to the Praetorium, the headquarters of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate is a pragmatic, brutal politician. He looks at Jesus, this battered, quiet man, and he sees no threat to Rome. He interrogates him. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answers, my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate understands power. He knows a revolutionary when he sees one. And Jesus isn't it. He walks out to the balcony and declares to the Jewish leaders, "I find no fault in him. This should be the end of it." But the crowd is gathering, and this is where the story takes its darkest and most confusing turn. Remember, just 5 days earlier, this same city welcomed Jesus with palm branches and shouts of Hosanna. They treated him like a conquering hero. Now, standing before Pilate, the crowd begins to chant something very different. Crucify him. Why? How does a crowd turn 180 degrees in less than a week? Pilate tries to offer them a way out. It is a Passover tradition to release one prisoner to the people. He presents them with a choice. On one side stands Jesus of Nazareth, the healer, the teacher, the man who raised the dead. On the other side stands a man named Barabbas. Barabbas isn't just a petty thief, he is an insurrectionist, a violent revolutionary who had committed murder during an uprising against Rome. He has blood on his hands. He is a terrorist in the eyes of Rome, but a freedom fighter to the radical zealots. Pilate asks, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?" The crowd screams, "Barabbas!" This moment defies logic, until you look at it through the lens of behavioral psychology. This is what we call the rage of disillusionment. You see, the people of Israel didn't want a spiritual savior. They weren't looking for someone to save them from their sins. They were looking for someone to save them from Caesar. They wanted a Messiah with a sword. They wanted a warrior who would call down fire from heaven and drive the Roman legions into the sea. But look at Jesus standing there. He is silent. He is bleeding. He hasn't fought back. He let himself be captured. To the crowd, he looks weak. He looks like a failure. When the people realize that Jesus isn't going to start the violent revolution they craved, their adoration turns instantly to hatred. It is the fury of a disappointed lover. They feel scammed. Barabbas, on the other hand, represents the violence they understand. He is a man of action. He killed Romans. He fits their narrative of power. By choosing Barabbas, the crowd is making a political statement. They are saying, "We don't want this Prince of Peace. We want the man of violence. We prefer the murderer who fights our way to the Savior who dies for us." It is the ultimate rejection. They aren't just rejecting Jesus. They are rejecting God's definition of salvation. Pilate is stunned. He asks, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" "Crucify him," they shout. The roar becomes a riot. Pilate sees that he can't win. He calls for a bowl of water. In front of the screaming mob, he washes his hands. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he declares. "It is your responsibility." And the crowd shouts back one of the most haunting lines in history, "His blood be on us and on our children." They got their wish. Pilate releases Barabbas. The murderer walks free, and the innocent man is handed over to be executed. But Jesus' suffering has barely begun. Before the cross, there is the scourging. Pilate orders Jesus to be flogged. He hopes that if he beats Jesus severely enough, the crowd will feel pity and let him go. But Roman scourging wasn't designed to elicit pity. It was designed to bring a man to the very edge of death. The soldiers strip him. They tie his hands to a post. They pick up the flagrum, a short whip with several leather thongs. At the end of each thong are tied jagged pieces of sheep bone and heavy lead balls. When the soldier strikes, the lead balls bruise the flesh deep down. As the whip is pulled back, the sharp bones tear the skin open. This isn't just a beating, it is a flaying. The first few blows cut through the skin. The next blows cut through the muscle. History tells us that scourging often exposed the veins, arteries, and even the bowels of the victim. Many men died right there at the whipping post from shock and blood loss. Jesus endures this. He stands there silent, absorbing the violence of the empire, the hatred of his people, and the physical agony of the torture. When they are finished, he is unrecognizable. But the soldiers aren't done. They decide to play a game. They find an old purple robe, the color of royalty, and throw it over his bleeding back. The fabric sticks to the open wounds. They weave a crown, not of gold, but of long, hard thorns from a local date palm. They jam it onto his head. The thorns puncture the scalp, one of the most vascular parts of the body, and blood streams down his face. They put a reed in his hand like a scepter and kneel before him, laughing. "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spit on him. They take the reed and smash it into his head, driving the thorns deeper. Pilate brings this broken, bleeding figure out to the crowd one last time. "Behold the man," he says. He thinks the sight of such ruined humanity will satisfy their bloodlust. But the psychology of the mob has no mercy. They don't see a man anymore. They see a target for all their pent-up rage against Rome, against life, against God. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate finally caves. He signs the death warrant. Jesus is led away to Golgotha. The map has narrowed down to a single hill. The final journey begins. To understand the physical reality of the cross, we have to rewind the tape just a few hours. We have to go back to the Garden of Gethsemane. This is where the physical deterioration begins. Jesus is kneeling among the olive trees. It is late at night. The emotional weight of what is coming is crushing him. The Bible records a detail here that many skeptics used to mock. It says his sweat became like great drops of blood. For centuries, people thought this was just a metaphor for intense prayer. But modern medicine tells us it is a real, though extremely rare, condition called hematidrosis. It happens only under the most extreme, life-threatening stress. The anxiety is so severe that the body's fight-or-flight response goes into overdrive. The tiny capillaries that feed the sweat glands rupture. Blood mixes with sweat and oozes through the pores of the skin. This creates two critical problems. First, it leaves the skin incredibly fragile and sensitive to touch. Second, it causes the body to go into a state of shock before a single hand has been laid on him. So when the temple guards arrest him, Jesus is already physically compromised. They drag him through the Kidron Valley. They bring him to the house of the high priest. And here the law is broken. Jewish law strictly forbade holding a capital trial at night. It forbade holding a trial without a break before the verdict. It forbade striking a prisoner who had not been convicted. That night, the religious leaders break every single one of those rules. They blindfold him. They take turns punching him in the face. They spit on him. By the time the sun rises, his face is likely swollen and bruised. But the true horror begins when he is handed over to the Romans. Pilate orders a scourging. We need to be very clear about what this means. In our modern minds, we hear whipping, and we might think of a leather strap leaving red marks. That is not a Roman scourging. The Romans called it the halfway death. It was designed to bring a man to the brink of dying without actually killing him. The instrument they use is the flagrum. It is a short wooden handle with several braided leather thongs. At the end of each thong, the Romans tie sharp shards of sheep bone and small lead balls. They strip Jesus. They tie his hands to a low post or a pillar, bending his back to expose the skin. When the soldier strikes, the lead balls hit the body first. They don't cut, they bruise. They slam into the muscle tissue with concussive force, causing deep contusions. Then the soldier yanks the whip back. This is when the bones do their work. The sharp edges catch on the skin and the muscle. They don't just scratch, they tear. They rip open the subcutaneous tissue. As the beating continues, the lacerations go deeper. They cut through the skin, then the fat, then the muscle. History tells us that in a severe scourging, the skeletal muscles were torn to ribbons, sometimes exposing the veins and even the bowels. The pain is beyond the capacity of the human nervous system to process. The back becomes a mass of bleeding tissue. And remember the condition from the garden? His skin was already tender from the hematidrosis. The trauma is catastrophic. Medically speaking, Jesus is now entering what doctors call hypovolemic shock. This happens when you lose a significant amount of blood, 20% or more. The heart starts racing to pump what little blood is left. Blood pressure drops. The person becomes faint, thirsty, and cold. This explains why, later on the road to the cross, Jesus collapses. It isn't because he is spiritually weak, it is because his body is shutting down from massive blood loss. But the torture isn't over. It shifts from physical to psychological. The soldiers drag him into the Praetorium courtyard. They gather the whole battalion, about 600 men, to watch the show. They want to play king. They find a scarlet military cloak, heavy, rough wool, and throw it over his shredded back. Imagine the friction of that wool on open nerve endings. The blood begins to clot, sticking the fabric to the wounds. Then they weave a crown. The thorns in this region aren't like rose thorns. They are the spikes of the date palm, or the Ziziphus spinacristi. They are hard, long, and sharp as needles. The soldiers jam this woven cap onto his head. The scalp is one of the most vascular parts of the human body. It bleeds profusely. The thorns pierce the skin, scraping against the skull, sending new waves of agony through his head and neck. They put a reed in his hand as a scepter. They kneel and mock him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they snatch the reed and smash it down on his head, driving the thorns deeper. And then they rip the robe off. Anyone who has ever had a bandage ripped off a wound knows the pain. Now imagine that over the entire surface of a back that has been flayed open. The wounds reopen. The bleeding starts all over again. When Pilate presents Jesus to the crowd saying, "Behold the man," he isn't presenting a man. He is presenting a ruin, a trembling, bleeding, unrecognizable figure, struggling to stand, fighting for consciousness, and yet he stands. This is the mystery that defies medicine. By all biological logic, he should be unconscious or dead. But he stands. He absorbs the mockery. He listens to the crowd scream for his death. He isn't a victim of circumstance, he is a volunteer. He is enduring the unendurable because the map has one final destination. Pilate hands down the sentence. The crossbeam, weighing anywhere from 75 to 100 pounds, is thrust onto his raw, bleeding shoulders. The march to Golgotha begins. He has to walk the path of death, but his body is already dying. The final 600 meters, the Via Dolorosa. Jesus collapses under the weight of the beam, but he is forced up again. Finally, they reach Golgotha, the place of the skull. It is a rocky outcrop outside the city walls, designed for maximum visibility. At 9 in the morning, the sound of hammer against iron rings out. They drive spikes, 5 to 7 inches long, through his wrists and his feet. This is a specific anatomical horror. By driving the nail through the wrist, they sever the median nerve. It sends shocks of burning pain, like lightning up the arms and into the torso. They hoist the cross upright and drop it into a hole in the ground. The impact tears at the wounds. Now gravity takes over. And here is where we need to correct a common misconception. Most people assume that a crucified man dies from blood loss or pain. But the Romans were far more cruel than that. The cross was an engineering marvel designed to kill you by asphyxiation. It is a slow, agonizing suffocation. When the body hangs by the arms, the weight pulls the rib cage upward and locks it in an inhaled position. You can draw a breath in, but you cannot breathe it out. To exhale, to simply let the air out of your lungs, Jesus has to push his entire body weight up against the nails in his feet. He pushes up. The nerves in his feet scream. He exhales. He gasps for a new breath. Then his muscles fail, and he sinks back down. The cycle begins again. Push up, breathe, collapse, agony. Push up, breathe, collapse, agony. He has to do this for every single breath, for 6 hours. As noon approaches, a strange phenomenon occurs. The sun is at its zenith, but the sky turns black. Darkness covers the land for 3 hours. It is as if the universe itself is hiding its face. And in that darkness, Jesus cries out, "It is finished." Those 3 words are not a whisper of defeat. They are a shout of victory. And this is where the history lesson becomes personal. This is where the map of the first century intersects with the map of your life right now. When Jesus thunders, "It is finished," he isn't just ending a Roman execution. Look closely at the specific nature of his pain. Do you see the reflection of your own? The betrayal of Judas? That is the sharp pain of the business partner who cheated you, or the spouse who walked out on you. Jesus felt that. The denial of Peter. That is the crushing loneliness when your friends abandon you because you are no longer successful or fun. Jesus felt that. The mockery of the crowd, that is the pressure of social media, the bullying, the feeling that the whole world is laughing at you. Jesus felt that. And the asphyxiation, the inability to breathe, that is the precise feeling of the modern soul. That is the crushing weight of depression that sits on your chest in the morning, making it impossible to get out of bed. That is the suffocating grip of addiction, whether it is drugs, alcohol, or pornography, that traps you in a cycle you can't break. That is the claustrophobia of a broken family or a jail cell. Jesus did not die a clean, distant death in a sanctuary. He died choking for air, naked and shamed. He went to the absolute bottom of human suffering so that today, right now, no matter how deep you are in the pit, you are not there alone. He isn't watching you from a distance. He is in the darkness with you, bearing the weight you cannot carry. He took the suffocation so you could breathe again. At that moment, he gives up his spirit. He dies, and the earth responds instantly. The ground shakes violently, rocks split open. In Jerusalem, inside the massive temple, the heavy veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the world tears in two, from top to bottom. The barrier is gone. The access to God is no longer restricted to a high priest once a year. The death of Jesus has kicked the door wide open. But on Golgotha, the show is over. The crowd disperses, beating their chests. The disciples are in hiding. The body of Jesus is taken down, wrapped in linen, and laid in a borrowed tomb. A massive stone is rolled across the entrance. Rome sets a seal on it. Soldiers are posted to guard it. It is Friday night. The world is dark. Hope is dead. Or so it seems, because the map doesn't end at the tomb. In the silence of the grave, something is stirring. Sunday is coming. The body of Jesus is laid in a rich man's tomb, carved out of solid rock. A stone weighing perhaps 2 tons is rolled across the entrance. The Roman governor orders a seal to be placed on it, a wax stamp that represents the authority of the empire. To break that seal is to declare war on Rome. A guard of soldiers is stationed outside. The message is clear. This movement is dead, buried, sealed. Saturday passes in silence. The Sabbath. The disciples are hiding behind locked doors, terrified that they are next. Their leader is dead. Their hope is crushed. But then, early on Sunday morning, while it is still dark, a group of women makes their way to the tomb. They are coming to finish the burial rites, to anoint the body with spices. They aren't expecting a resurrection. They are expecting a corpse. When they arrive, the unthinkable has happened. The stone, that massive barrier, has been rolled away. The guards are gone, and the tomb is empty. Mary Magdalene is there. She runs to tell Peter and John. They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. She assumes grave robbery. It's the only logical explanation. But then she returns to the garden. She is weeping. She sees a man standing there and assumes he is the gardener. "Sir," she says, "if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him." The man speaks one word, "Mary." The voice is familiar. It cuts through her grief like a lightning bolt. She turns. It is him. And here we need to stop and look at this moment through the lens of a historian. This specific detail, that Mary Magdalene was the first witness, is perhaps the single strongest piece of evidence that the resurrection is not a fabrication. If you were a first-century Jew trying to invent a new religion, this is exactly how you would not tell the story. You have to understand the legal and social context of the time. In first-century Judea, and indeed in Roman law, the testimony of a woman was considered virtually worthless. It was not admissible in a court of law. A woman could not serve as a legal witness. In fact, years later, the Greek philosopher Celsus, writing against Christianity, mocked the resurrection specifically because it relied on the testimony of hysterical women. So think about the logic here. If the male disciples were making this story up to convince the world that Jesus was the Messiah, they would never, ever have chosen a woman to be the primary witness. They would have written that Peter saw him first, or John, or Nicodemus, a respected member of the Sanhedrin, or even a Roman centurion. They would have chosen a witness with legal credibility. By recording that it was Mary, a woman, and a woman with a troubled past, the gospel writers were admitting a detail that was socially embarrassing and legally inconvenient. So why did they include it? Why risk the credibility of their entire story on the testimony of a woman? There is only one explanation, because that is what actually happened. They recorded it because they were committed to the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. The foolishness of the narrative is the seal of its authenticity. Mary runs back to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." But they don't believe her. The text says her words seem to them like nonsense. They are huddled in fear. Then that evening, the lock turns. The doors are shut tight, but suddenly Jesus is standing among them. He doesn't knock. He doesn't open the door. He simply appears. The laws of physics that govern our reality seem to bend around him. They are terrified. They think they are seeing a ghost. But Jesus says, "Peace be with you." He shows them his hands and his side. He eats a piece of broiled fish to prove he is physical, not a phantom. But one man is missing, Thomas. When the others tell him, "We have seen the Lord," Thomas refuses to buy it. He is the original skeptic. He says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Thomas speaks for every modern skeptic. He wants empirical evidence. He wants tactile proof. A week later, Jesus returns. He goes straight to Thomas. He doesn't rebuke him for his questions. He offers him the data he needs. "Put your finger here," Jesus says. "See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas doesn't just believe. He falls to his knees and makes the supreme confession of the New Testament, "My Lord and my God." But the map of the resurrection doesn't stop in Jerusalem. Jesus told them to meet him in Galilee. On a mountain in the north, far from the religious politics of the capital, he appears again. But this time, it isn't just to the 12. The Apostle Paul records that Jesus appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at the same time. This destroys the hallucination theory. Hallucinations are individual experiences. They happen in the private mind of a single person. 500 people don't share the same hallucination simultaneously. This was a public event. It was a historical singularity. The tomb was empty. The body was gone. And hundreds of people were willing to stake their lives on the fact that they had seen him alive. They weren't dying for a metaphor. They weren't dying for a feeling. They were dying for a fact. The map of his life, which seemed to end at the cross, has just expanded into eternity. And now he gives them their final coordinates. 2 disciples are walking to Emmaus. It is a 7-mile hike from Jerusalem. They are walking away from the city, shoulders slumped, defeated. To them, the movement is over. They had hoped Jesus was the one to redeem Israel, but they watched him die. A stranger joins them on the road. He asks what they are discussing. For hours he walks with them, opening the scriptures, explaining that the Messiah had to suffer to enter his glory. They invite him to dinner. They sit down. The stranger takes the bread. He blesses it. He breaks it. The sound of the crust cracking echoes the Last Supper. Suddenly their eyes are opened. It is him. And in that instant, he vanishes. The fatigue is gone. They run the 7 miles back to Jerusalem in the dark to tell the others. It is true. The Lord has risen. 40 days later, the timeline of Jesus' earthly ministry comes to its end. He gathers his followers on the Mount of Olives. He doesn't give them a political manifesto. He gives them a mission. Go and make disciples of all nations. Then he leaves them. He ascends to heaven, and the physical map of Jesus' life, from the manger in Bethlehem to the cross at Golgotha to the Mount of Olives, is complete. The red line on the map of Israel stops here, but a new map is just being unrolled. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue. Jesus finished his work so that ours could begin. He walked the lowest valleys, endured the torture of the cross, and conquered death so that today, no matter where you are on your own map, whether you are in a valley of depression, a prison of addiction, or a season of doubt, you are not walking alone. He has been there. He has mapped the terrain of suffering, and he has left a trail for you to follow home. If this story has touched you, if you see the evidence of history aligning with the truth of faith, I want to ask you to do something. Share this video, not for the views, but because someone you know needs to hear that they aren't alone. Leave a comment below with your story. Let's build a community of witnesses right here. But the question remains, how did this message survive? How did a small group of uneducated fishermen and tax collectors manage to topple the Roman Empire with nothing but a message of love? Where did they go? How did they die? To understand how the gospel reached you today, You have to see the next chapter. You need to see where the 12 went. Click here to watch the Apostles' map. You will see the routes, the dangers, and the incredible distances they traveled to bring the news to the world. The map continues there. Don't miss it.